Joining us on the broadcast is Mr. Dan Perry, World Affairs Analyst from Tel Aviv. Mr. Perry, I have to understand from you, what do you make of the latest comments by the Spanish Prime Minister, who says that the EU has failed in its duty to put any sort of pressure on Israel to end the war, and that there is a much greater focus that the world is placing on the Russia-Ukraine war?
You know, I personally think the war in Gaza should end and should have ended some time ago, and that there are other ways to achieve Israel's understandable goals of removing Hamas from power in an area on their border from which they were attacked and getting back their hostages. There's a legitimate debate to be had there. And in fact, most of the Israeli public would join Prime Minister Sanchez in wishing there were an end to the war. The government's insistence on escalating and continuing is quite unpopular in Israel. That said, I'm not so impressed with his framing of this issue. To compare Israel's desire to rid itself and the Palestinians of a jihadist mafia that started this war by massacring 1,200 people in Israel to Russia's attack on Ukraine, which was completely unprovoked, utterly inadmissible, and cannot be defended on any level whatsoever, is absurd. And part of Europe's problem with Israel is that they lose credibility when its leaders make such comparisons that are, frankly, to my mind, as someone who led AP coverage in both Europe and the Middle East, outrageous. Now, of course, it's true that to the extent that Europe wants the war to end, it has failed to compel Israel to do that. But frankly, if Europe wants the war to end, what they really should do is figure out a better plan. Help Israel figure out a better plan to dislodge Hamas from Gaza. That is currently a global consensus that is backed by NATO, the European Union, North America, US, and the Arab League that 6 weeks ago called on Hamas to disarm. The one sure way to end the war in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and agree to disarm. There's really no debating that point. And, you know, people who call on the war to end, as I do, are beholden to actually come up with a better plan to achieve that end, which must be achieved. And I repeat, most of all, that would be a failure to a favor to the Palestinians, who are tormented and oppressed by Hamas that has brought tremendous catastrophe upon them by launching a war that they cannot win.
All right, Mr. Perry, thank you so much for joining us.